You ever have one of those moments where everything seems fine, like you're just coasting on a normal Tuesday, until your whole life turns on its head in a matter of minutes? Yeah. That was me at 38 years old, sitting across from an HR rep I barely knew, being told I was done. No warning. No meeting request. Just an awkward shuffle into a gray conference room and a folder that felt like a final chapter. I'm Camille Strayer, and I work now as a compliance consultant for tech-forward logistics startups, but before that, I was the lead operations analyst for Westvale Transit Logistics, until they blindsided me and kicked me to the curb over what they claimed was a policy violation. And let me tell you, the story behind it? It's not just unfair, it's unbelievable. I spent 6 years at that company. 6 long years building models, optimizing freight flows, saving them millions in fuel surcharges and late shipment penalties. I wasn't some slacker skating by. I was the one people came to when things got tight, when numbers didn't add up, when a client was one more missed delivery away from pulling the plug. My evaluations were consistently above standard. My teams hit their KPIs every single quarter. And in all that time, I never, not once, called in sick or took more than a long weekend. Until this past March, when my sister Sasha had to undergo an unexpected but serious procedure down in Raleigh. Family is everything to me, and Sasha? She's all I've got. So I did what the handbook said. I filed my leave request through the portal, notified my manager in writing, even CC'd HR for good measure. Got an email confirmation, too. Or so I thought. When I came back the following Monday, things were weird. You know that strange vibe you get when people are avoiding eye contact and conversations cut off when you enter the room? That kind of quiet that hums with something just beneath the surface. I shrugged it off at first, figured people were just stressed. It was end of quarter and those always come with their own brand of chaos. But then Tori from HR messaged me directly and asked me to meet with her at 2 p.m. in conference room B. No reason given. No agenda. Just one of those cold, corporate messages that makes your stomach twist because you already know it's not good news. Tori Medlin was newer to the company. Mid-30s, always polite but robotic. The kind of HR professional who memorizes policies better than she understands people. When I walked into the room, she didn't greet me. Didn't offer me a seat. Just sat there with a manila folder on the table, flipping through it like she was trying to memorize a script. I sat down anyway and waited, arms folded, heart pounding. Finally, she pushed the folder toward me and said, "Camille, we have a situation. According to our records, you failed to follow proper leave protocol. There's no record of a time-off request in our system. This constitutes a violation of our attendance policy." I blinked. Stared at her. My hands went numb. I said, "There must be some mistake." I submitted the request through the HR platform. I even have a confirmation email. But Tori didn't budge. She kept that trained, sterile look like someone had coached her to expect pushback. "Unfortunately, we have no record of such a submission," she said. "And as a result, your employment is being terminated effective immediately. You'll have 30 minutes to collect your things." She slid a termination form and a pre-printed NDA across the table like it was some routine paperwork. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just sat there in shock, replaying every click, every email I'd sent, wondering how it could have all just vanished. I told her I wasn't signing anything. Not without a lawyer. Not when the story they were telling me didn't even make sense. She gave me a tight nod like she'd expected that too and said, "That's your choice. No follow-up. No appeal process. Just a security escort waiting to walk me back to my desk like I was a threat." It was humiliating. People stared. Some avoided my eyes. A few whispered. Liam, the intern I'd trained for over a year, didn't even look up from his monitor as I passed. That should have been my first clue that something much bigger was happening. Behind the scenes. At that point, I didn't know they were already planning to replace me with someone cheaper, or that the time-off request I submitted might have been deleted on purpose. I just knew something stank. And even though I walked out of that building jobless, heartbroken, and confused, I had one thing they didn't know about, something sitting dormant on my personal hard drive at home. A little tool I once built to double-check my hours during a payroll glitch. A piece of code I'd almost forgotten about. But it remembered everything. And that little tool? That's the reason Westvale would end up on the front page of the Business Chronicle 10 months later, knee-deep in a federal investigation. All because they tried to erase me. All because they lied. You know that feeling when something seems off, like you're missing a puzzle piece but can't quite put your finger on it? That's how I felt in the days after I was let go from Westvale Transit Logistics. It wasn't just the shock of being fired. It was the quiet. The absence of chaos. The way no one reached out afterward. Not even a "sorry to hear what happened" or "you okay" from people I'd worked alongside for years. And then, out of nowhere, I got a message from a friend still inside. Just one line, sent from their personal phone with a blurry screenshot attached. It said, "You might want to see this." I opened the image and froze. It was the updated org chart. There in bold font was Liam Radner, Senior Analyst, Ops Division. That was my title. My team. My seat. Liam had been the intern I'd mentored for over a year. Fresh out of school. Bright, eager, but green. I'd taken the time to walk him through our databases, helped him prep for meetings, even coached him on how to talk to clients. I remembered thinking, this kid's got potential. But now here he was, promoted to my exact position, just 48 hours after I was fired. And if that wasn't enough, word on the inside was that he was hired in at a salary 20% higher than mine. It wasn't just a slap in the face. It was a full-on betrayal. At first, I tried to make excuses in my head. Maybe he had applied for something completely different. Maybe the timing was weird but unintentional. But the more I dug, the clearer it became, this wasn't a coincidence. They hadn't fired me over some missing time off form. That excuse was just the cover. What they really wanted was to replace me with someone younger, someone less experienced, someone who'd nod along and not question shady decisions. I wasn't redundant. I was inconvenient. I was the one who asked too many questions when things didn't add up. And that made me disposable. I sat there in my apartment for a while, angry but also weirdly calm. Like something in my gut had finally clicked. You ever get that sense where your mind just switches over from hurt to clarity? That's where I landed. If they wanted to treat me like I was nothing, like I could be swapped out and erased without anyone noticing, they clearly didn't remember who they were messing with. Because I didn't just do my job, I documented it. I tracked things. I kept backups. And suddenly, I remembered something I hadn't touched in almost 2 years. A little folder tucked into an old external hard drive labeled SentraWatch. Back in 2021, we had a payroll system bug that kept dropping hours from the time cards. Management brushed it off, said it was a known issue with no immediate fix. But I wasn't about to let my paycheck be wrong month after month. So I wrote a basic Python script that parsed timestamps from our internal platforms and checked them against what the payroll system reported. I called it SentraWatch. It was simple, a little clunky, but it got the job done. Over time, I added more functions, pulling logs from Slack, badge entries, even email login records. I never told anyone about it. It was just a quiet side project. To protect myself, after I got fired, I didn't look at SentraWatch right away. Honestly, I thought that chapter of my life was over. But now, seeing Liam in my old role, hearing how smoothly they moved on like I never existed, it lit a fire under me. I dug through my closet, pulled out the drive, and fired it up. There it was, right where I'd left it. Old scripts, test logs, and months' worth of time data archives. And that's when it hit me, if I could see my own hours, what else could I see? What else had I unknowingly captured over the years? I hadn't built a tool. I'd built a time machine. One that could show who was where, when, and doing what. And maybe, just maybe, it could also show how far the rot went inside that company. They thought I'd go quietly. But they forgot something important. When you fire someone who knows where the bodies are buried, you better hope they don't remember where they kept the shovel. And I had just found mine. There's something comforting about old code. You know it's clunky, a little messy, and definitely not elegant, but it works. It holds your logic, your problem solving. It's like opening a time capsule you didn't realize you buried. That's how I felt when I pulled up the original folder for SentraWatch. I hadn't touched it since late 2021, back when Westvale's time-tracking software was glitching out so badly it was shaving hours off employee logs without explanation. The company kept saying it was a syncing issue with the cloud servers. But after my paycheck came up short 3 times in a row and HR kept giving me canned apologies, I decided to build a workaround. My own form of insurance. SentraWatch was never intended to be fancy. It started as a basic Python script that parsed raw data logs pulled from the company's internal platforms. It would pull in timestamps from Outlook emails, Slack pings, badge entry scans, and even login data from our VPN gateway. Then it cross-referenced those with the hours in the payroll system to find mismatches. It wasn't pretty, but it got results. I remember running it the first time and being shocked by how much time just disappeared. 20 minutes here, an hour there, sometimes entire shifts. Multiply that by dozens of employees, and it wasn't just sloppy, it was suspicious. At the time, I brought it to my manager, and she brushed it off. Said I was overthinking it and that I should trust the system. So I didn't push. I just kept the tool for myself, quietly tweaking it whenever new data sources became available. Eventually, it could generate a visual timeline of my day from multiple digital footprints. It was overkill for a time card check, sure, but I was curious, and honestly, I didn't like being gaslit by corporate tech. So I kept going. And then I forgot about it. Life got busy. The glitches calmed down. And SentraWatch just sat idle on my backup drive, gathering dust, until now, sitting in my apartment, staring at Liam's name sitting pretty on that org chart, something inside me snapped. I wasn't just upset that they'd replaced me, I was disturbed at how easily they did it. Like I'd never existed. They even wiped my internal profile. My name didn't show up in the company directory anymore. Projects I'd led were now attributed to someone else. That's when a thought crept in, not angry, not desperate, but methodical. What if I could use SentraWatch for more than just my own logs? What if I turned it outward? I knew from my time on the inside that Westvale's systems were loosely integrated. HR ran on Chronosoft. Messaging lived on Slack Enterprise Grid. Security used KeyCard Pro for badge swipes. Most of the platforms had accessible APIs. And I still had months of archived logs saved from old compliance audits and test environments, stuff no one thought to lock down because I was just an analyst. But what I had was enough to build something bigger. Something smarter. Something that could piece together patterns and reveal what was hiding behind the curtain. So I got to work. I rewrote the script architecture to be modular, letting me plug in new data sources with minimal effort. I upgraded the parser to include user behavior analytics. If someone claimed to be working remotely but was badging into HQ at the same time, SentraWatch would catch that. If someone sent Slack messages while logging double hours on a third-party consulting invoice, it would flag that too. I wasn't building a script anymore. I was building a surveillance engine. One that could show the truth, even when everyone else was pretending not to see it. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about proof. I needed to know if what happened to me was an isolated incident or part of a bigger pattern. If Westvale could erase my paper trail so easily, how many others had they done this to? How many junior staff had their PTO stolen or their hours adjusted without explanation? The system didn't make errors, it made decisions. Quietly. Behind the scenes. And SentraWatch? It was about to shine a light right into that darkness. I didn't know what I would find yet. But I knew I had everything I needed to look. A backup drive. A stack of anonymized logs. And just enough fury to fuel the long nights ahead. They thought firing me would end the story. But all it really did was give me time to write a new one line of code at a time. There's a strange kind of clarity that comes when you're working alone, with nothing but your instincts, your machine, and just enough anger to keep you focused. After I'd unearthed the old SentraWatch files and realized what they could still do, I made a decision. If this tool once saved me from a few missing hours, it could now uncover the full truth. So I started over. Not just tweaking the old script, but completely rebuilding it. The original had been functional, sure, but crude. This time I was crafting something smarter. Adaptive. Quiet. Something that didn't just check logs, it understood them. I gave it a brain, so to speak. I rewrote SentraWatch as a modular AI assistant, using open-source models as the foundation, and training it with my own work data. I built plugins one by one. The first let it pull badge entry metadata from KeyCard Pro reports, things I still had stored from an old compliance audit. The next plugin scraped timestamps from Slacks Enterprise export tool, which I'd used years ago during a migration test. Then came the VPN log parser, built to detect geolocation anomalies and login patterns. And finally, calendar analysis, cross-referencing scheduled meetings with actual activity across other systems. Everything fed into one timeline for each user. It was neat. It was surgical. It was terrifying that I knew I had to test it before I let myself get too hopeful. So I ran a scan on my own logs first. Sure enough, SentraWatch pulled up that same day in March 2021 when I worked remotely from home, but the badge system had logged me in at headquarters, a glitch I remembered clearly. That was the moment I knew it was working. So I turned it loose on the rest of the logs I had, an anonymized batch I'd quietly exported for a latency study back when I was still at Westvale. I started small. Just a sample of 12 mid-level employees, across 3 departments. Let SentraWatch stretch its legs. It didn't take long before it found something. The first red flag was subtle. A vice president in operations, Dominic Havel, 46, based in Chicago, had calendar events labeled Zurich partner meetings for 3 consecutive days in early February. He posted pictures on LinkedIn from a boardroom overseas. But SentraWatch flagged those same days with badge swipes at the Chicago office, early morning, midday, and once around 6:40 p.m. Slack messages sent from his account showed Eastern timestamps. VPN access? Logged in from a Chicago IP. He wasn't in Zurich. Not for a minute. I thought maybe someone else had swiped his badge. But 3 days in a row? With matching digital behavior? Not a chance. I started digging. Exported more logs. Opened up additional users. What began with one anomaly became dozens. Senior managers who had supposedly been off-grid on international assignments were simultaneously showing up in US badge systems. One even billed for overtime during a week he claimed to be out for surgery. Another double-logged hours. Between Westvale and a private consultancy he quietly owned, same time blocks, same project labels, just under different clients. I was stunned. Not because the fraud was complex, but because it was so casual. Like they weren't even trying to hide it. They weren't worried about the systems because they assumed no one would ever connect the dots, and that's when it hit me. They weren't sloppy, they were confident. Westvale had built their processes on the assumption that no one at the analyst level would ever look too closely. That IT audits were just boxes to check. That HR complaints would go nowhere. And, for the most part, they were right. Until now. Because SentraWatch didn't care about titles or permissions. It saw what the data told it. And what the data was telling me was that Westvale Transit Logistics wasn't just mismanaging payroll, it was enabling coordinated, high-level fraud. I felt a chill run down my spine. Not fear exactly, more like responsibility. I had something powerful. And I knew if I kept digging, I'd find more. This wasn't just about my firing anymore. This was about every employee who'd been shorted, overlooked, or silenced. SentraWatch had become more than a safety net. It was now a flashlight, and I was just beginning to aim it into the shadows. The first time I saw the 272-hour total, I thought it was a typo. No one bills that many hours in a month without raising alarms. But there it was, in plain view on a billing export I'd pulled from a test environment I still had access to back when I was optimizing throughput reports. Darren Gleason, age 48, the same department head who used to roll his eyes every time I brought up data integrity in meetings, had logged 272 billable hours, just for external consulting. At the same time, he was also listed as project lead on 3 internal initiatives with mandatory sprint updates and meeting attendance. The overlap wasn't subtle. It was blatant. And somehow, no one was asking questions. The more I dug, the worse it got. Westvale Transit had a system they called client-sponsored internal ops, which sounded harmless enough, just a fancy way of saying a client had funded a special tool or resource. But SentraWatch showed me the real picture. Employees, mostly director level and above, were billing the same blocks of time to 2 different entities. One was the internal payroll system. The other was an external consulting ledger used for third-party invoicing. In theory, they were consulting for outside clients. In reality, they were at their desks, working Westvale projects and slapping a client name on the hours later. I built a report in SentraWatch to filter for duplicate time windows across systems. In just 3 weeks of data, it flagged 19 employees with overlapping logs, each with more than 60 duplicate hours. But Darren Gleason was the crown jewel. His pattern went back months. He'd schedule client-facing calls, log the hour as strategy advising, then immediately jump on an internal call marked workflow alignment. Both hours billed. Both paid. It was like watching a magician pull quarters out of thin air. Only in this case, those quarters added up to tens of thousands of dollars per month. I remember staring at the screen that night, running Darren's summary timeline. It showed an average of 13.2 logged hours per weekday. Which might be impressive if he weren't also showing up at charity board luncheons, golf outings with vendors, and even listed as attending a week-long leadership retreat. SentraWatch had started piecing together data from LinkedIn updates, internal newsletters, and Slack activity to cross-reference whereabouts. The guy was everywhere and nowhere at once. And the system was eating it up like it was gospel. The wildest part? It wasn't just Darren. There was a small group of managers and senior analysts all doing the same thing, just in smaller amounts. It was like a coordinated scheme, quiet, contained, but highly profitable for those involved. One of them, Priya Dondekar, 41, had been my skip-level lead in workforce automation. She'd taught me early on how to read consulting invoices for optimizations, a word she said meant bill padding with finesse. At the time, I thought she was joking. Now I wasn't so sure. Her calendar, too, was full of overlaps. And she'd even signed off on some of Darren's biggest client invoices. This was no accident. It was structured. Polished. Like a financial shell game designed by people who assumed no one would ever look under the hood. Why would they? Everyone in the inner circle got their share. HR had no reason to flag anomalies, they were part of the payout. Finance only audited the top layer. And the clients? They were billed vague service descriptions they couldn't verify. Westvale had effectively created clones, employees who existed in 2 places at once, earning double while delivering half. I started documenting everything. Screenshots. Timestamp. Tables. Logs color-coded with overlap zones. It became a digital portfolio of manipulation. I even built a feature in SentraWatch that auto-generates summaries of questionable billing logic, complete with confidence scores. And Darren's scores? Off the charts. This wasn't just some lazy manager sneaking extra hours. This was organized, replicated, and condoned fraud. And the worst part was knowing that if I hadn't been fired, I never would have seen any of it. I'd still be under Darren, following orders, cleaning up reports he'd doctored himself. They fired me to make space. But all they did was give me room to see. And now I wasn't just trying to prove they were wrong about me. I was about to prove they were stealing, from clients, from shareholders, and from every honest employee still. Grinding through real hours while someone else cashed in twice. It started with a single alert, just a blip from SentraWatch that flagged a drop in accrued PTO hours for an hourly employee in the logistics team. At first, I thought it was a calculation error or maybe a user-side sync delay. But then it happened. Again. And again. By the time I cross-checked the logs across the entire workforce database snapshot I'd retained, I saw a pattern so specific it couldn't be accidental. Every loss happened in the first week of a new quarter. And it always targeted non-exempt employees, hourly folks. The ones least likely to notice a missing block of vacation hours until it was too late to fight it. The first real name that came up was Camille Reyes, 29, a supply chain coordinator in logistics. She'd been with Westvale for 4 years. Her logs showed a clean attendance record, regular overtime, and perfectly accrued vacation time. Until one day, 46 hours were simply gone. No note. No use request. Just vanished. And right after that, a tiny footnote appeared in her HR profile referencing something called Q1 time rebalance. That phrase didn't exist in any policy I'd ever seen during my 6 years with the company. So I dug beneath layers of internal policy updates, buried inside an old compliance memo from the year prior. I found it, one sentence folded into a 9-page document. Management reserves the right to implement time rebalancing protocols to ensure equitable resource allocation. That was it. No definition. No examples. Just vague corporate speak that meant one thing once you matched it to what SentraWatch was catching. They were taking away people's PTO and redistributing it upward. By now, I'd configured SentraWatch to pull delta values for every employee's time off ledger between pay periods. It showed every subtraction, every timestamp, and every audit trail log attached. The second name that popped up was Jordan Lenz, 33, an analyst in finance. He lost 52 hours, which amounted to nearly 2 weeks of earned vacation. When I checked to see who approved the change, it led to a director-level override. That override was signed off by none other than Priya Dondekar, yes, the same Priya who had shown up in my earlier billing analysis. The deeper I looked, the more I found. Dozens of employees, many of them frontline operations or mid-level coordinators. All had one thing in common: they'd lost significant PTO without any explanation. Most of these folks didn't even realize it. There were no automated alerts when hours were retracted. No formal notice. If you didn't manually tally your balances every 2 weeks, you'd miss it. And once the quarter closed, the hours became unrecoverable due to rebalancing enforcement, per the fine print. Now here's the kicker. I correlated the lost hours with executive compensation timelines. The more PTO was removed, the more cost savings Westvale could report on quarterly ledgers. And where did that savings go? Straight into the bonus pool. SentraWatch mapped the spikes. Q2 rebalancing led to a $417,000 bump in leadership incentive disbursements. Q3? $531,000. I ran a full-year model using just the data I had and calculated a total of $1.29 million in stolen vacation payouts. That's money that should have gone into people's paychecks when they cashed out PTO, or time they should have been able to use for themselves and their families. Instead, it was funneled up to cover executive bonuses and performance milestones. I remember feeling this awful mix of rage and sorrow. Because this wasn't a tech glitch or a billing error or even some kind of internal oversight. This was targeted theft wrapped in HR lingo and hidden behind compliance walls. The people affected were the same ones who'd never dream of challenging leadership. They just assumed maybe they miscounted, or forgot they'd used time off, or shrugged it off entirely because who wants to argue with payroll and risk being labeled difficult? The phrase, time rebalancing, became something dark to me. It wasn't policy, it was cover. A permission slip for executives to steal time. Real, lived time. And nobody was watching because nobody was supposed to. Until now. Until SentraWatch. Until me. I'd gone looking for proof they were wrong about my termination, but I found proof they were wrong about everything. Every layer I peeled back revealed another betrayal. And as I compiled the final spreadsheet with names, hours lost, and the dollar value associated with each, I knew exactly what this was. It was systematic wage theft, and it had a paper trail. One I was now collecting. I wasn't even looking for it when I found it. I was combing through archived SharePoint metadata that had been mirrored to a hidden directory on my old work laptop, the one I'd cloned out of instinct before turning it in. Most of it was benign, quarterly planning docs, holiday memos, outdated training decks. But then a file name stopped me cold. It read, Access Integrity and Data Trail Assessment, Internal Use Only, April 2022. It looked official, even mundane at first glance. But when I opened it, my skin prickled. The document was authored by Meera Sandoval, a name I remembered. Well, she was one of the last truly ethical people I'd ever met inside Westvale, a quiet but razor-sharp compliance auditor in her early 40s who always kept her head down but her ethics intact. Myra's report was laid out methodically, just like I remembered her working style. It started with user access logs, reviewing badge entry inconsistencies across data centers and administrative offices. Then it moved into VPN anomalies, identifying multiple high-level users who routinely logged in from 2 places at once. Similar to the pattern SentraWatch had already flagged for me. Page after page, it stacked quiet revelations. Meera had clearly found something, and she hadn't been subtle about it. Each chart came with a footnote in bold, behavior not aligned with Internal Compliance Protocol 7.3.1. The phrase showed up 15 times by page 18 *, but then, abruptly, on page 19, the content stopped. The final visible line read, "This summary was originally intended for presentation to the Audit Oversight Committee on April 14, 2022. What followed was a redacted page titled Executive Summary Suspended Pending Review. The document just ended. No signatures. No follow-up annotations. But what caught my attention next was even more damning. The document's metadata log * SentraWatch had been upgraded to parse document headers and access trails, and when I fed the file through its audit lens, I saw that the final revision to the document wasn't made by Mira. It was locked and archived by Trent Albury, the Vice President of Compliance, on April 12, 2022, exactly 2 days before the presentation Mira had referenced. There was no version history past that date. It had been frozen, zipped, and archived with admin privileges reserved for C-suite access. Mira's name appeared only once more, in a final metadata tag dated May 2, 2022, marked, "User offboarded. Employee exit finalized." I remember just sitting back in my chair for a long while. Because everything about that sequence told me one thing: Mira had found exactly what I'd found, maybe more, and someone had shut it down. Completely. No disciplinary actions followed. No meeting minutes. The report was never circulated again. Mira's resignation hadn't made headlines internally either. I remembered it being mentioned in passing, some vague "moving on to new opportunities" email from HR that nobody questioned at the time. I ran a quick trace through internal chat logs I still had access to via cached Slack channels. Mira had gone completely silent the week before her exit. Not even a farewell message in the compliance team group. That wasn't like her. It was like she had vanished, or had been told to. I checked her LinkedIn. No updates since 2022. No mention of new employment. It was as if she'd been scrubbed right out of the company's memory, just like the audit. It shook me more than I expected. Because Mira was smart, honest, thorough. If she couldn't get that report through, if she was buried that easily, then what chance did I have of being heard? And that's when I realized something vital. Mira didn't just try to expose the same behavior I was now documenting. She left a breadcrumb trail. That audit was proof that someone inside the system knew what was happening and tried to stop it before it metastasized into the corporate rot. I'd uncovered *, but they didn't just ignore her, they silenced her. Locked the files, offboarded her, and erased the conversation. That terrified me. Because if they could do that to Mira Sandoval, what would they do if they knew what I was building with SentraWatch? What would they do if they knew someone had all of this data compiled, linked, and annotated, not just in hidden folders but in chronological reports that painted a clear, damning picture of coordinated fraud? That night, I made 2 decisions. First, I backed up every single SentraWatch report to 3 different encrypted drives and placed one off-site. And second, I promised myself something I had whispered just once before: they buried Mira's audit, but they wouldn't bury mine. I couldn't sit on this anymore. Every day that went by with that evidence in my hands felt like I was complicit. Like I was helping them keep the lie alive just by staying silent. So, I made a decision, one that couldn't be undone. I took a clean burner laptop, the kind you pay cash for and never register, and loaded it with a secure Linux build on a virtual machine. No cookies, no personal logins, no digital fingerprints. I wasn't going to be reckless. I was going to be thorough. I compiled everything into a 90-page dossier, screenshots of Slack messages, internal emails, timestamped log files from badge readers and VPN entries, system-wide comparisons that showed double billing practices, even the metadata trail of the buried audit Mira Sandoval tried to release. SentraWatch's report summaries were the backbone, each one laid out with graphs and tags that spoke louder than I ever could. The more I formatted it, the more it stopped feeling like a revenge mission and started feeling like justice. I wasn't just doing this for myself anymore. I was doing it for Camille from logistics, who lost half her vacation time without even knowing it. For Mira, who tried to do the right thing and got erased. For all the people at Westvale who didn't have the tools to fight back, or the nerve to. I redacted anything that could trace back to me: no usernames, no metadata from my personal drives, and absolutely no network traces. I even printed some pages out, scanned them fresh, and recompiled the PDFs just to cut any chance of an embedded signature. Paranoia? Maybe. But I'd seen firsthand what this company did to people who got in the way. Now, who to send it to? That answer came to me faster than I expected. Her name was Harper Kwan. We weren't exactly close anymore, but we'd interned together back in college. I remembered her as smart, no-nonsense, and stubbornly moral. The last time we spoke, she was 2 years into her role at the Department of Justice's Commercial Fraud Division, chasing procurement crimes and shady vendor contracts. I hadn't talked to her in years, but I knew she was still there. I'd been quietly checking public court filings and saw her name pop up on a federal case last fall. That was enough. I created a ghost email using a secure relay in Iceland and embedded the dossier as a password-protected file hosted in a hidden drive. I included only one line of instruction in the message: "This is an internal fraud report tied to Westvale Transit Logistics. Please verify the data trail and compare it to public filings from Q1 2022 onward. I remain anonymous for safety reasons." I hit send. My hands didn't even shake. I think I'd already made peace with whatever came next. But what I didn't expect was how fast the reply came. 2 days later, the burner email pinged with a message from Harper. Just one line: "We're looking into it. Don't contact me again." No signature. No questions. Not even a thank you. And that's when I knew I'd hit a nerve. Government employees don't waste words when they're staring down something real. That sentence wasn't casual. It was procedure. It was protection, for both of us. I closed the laptop, powered it down completely, and buried it in a fireproof bag inside a storage locker across town that I paid for in cash. From that moment on, I played it like I didn't know a thing. I went back to consulting gigs, kept my head low, kept SentraWatch offline. I didn't tell anyone. Not my sister Sasha, not my closest friends. That kind of secret isn't something you share, it's something you guard. Because if Westvale caught even a whisper that someone had blown the whistle, they'd move fast and dirty. Still, I kept tabs. I checked SEC filings, company press releases, social media chatter from employees still inside. For a while, nothing. Just the same corporate jargon and stock photo leadership posts. But I knew how long these investigations take. I knew that silence wasn't a sign of inaction, it was the sign of pressure building behind the scenes. And I was ready for it. I wasn't afraid anymore. I had already lost my job, my reputation, and my trust in the system. But what they didn't know was that I'd kept something else, the truth. And I had just handed it to someone who could do something with it. 2 months after I sent that dossier, the ripple finally turned into a wave. It was early on a Wednesday morning when the headlines started hitting the wires: DOJ opens civil fraud inquiry into mid-sized logistics company. The article didn't name Westvale at first, but I knew. I knew from the wording, from the exact phrase, fraudulent billing schemes involving internal and external accounts, and the mention of the Department of Justice's Commercial Fraud Division. I clicked through every article, every update, watching the story unfold in real time. By noon, Westvale was trending on LinkedIn and Twitter. By nightfall, their leadership page was mysteriously down for maintenance. By Friday, the subpoenas landed. I knew Darren Gleason would be among the first to fall, and I was right. He was placed on immediate administrative leave along with 2 other VPs, Trent Albury and a woman named Lizette Crane from finance, whose name I hadn't seen in my data but must have had deeper involvement. Their photos were stripped from the executive directory, and a generic press release said they were cooperating fully with investigators. But insiders started talking. People I hadn't heard from in years messaged me through old, dormant accounts, asking if I had heard the news. "What the hell is going on over there?" one friend wrote. Another just sent a link and 3 fire emojis. It was surreal. I couldn't say a word back. Not even a nod. Not yet. Then came the bombshell. Over 300 former employees joined a class action lawsuit surrounding the PTO reallocation scheme. Apparently, once the DOJ opened the door, employment lawyers swarmed through it. Camille from Logistics was quoted anonymously in one of the filings. Jordan from Finance was on record, detailing how his PTO balance had mysteriously vanished in 2 separate quarters. The suit alleged wage theft, deliberate falsification of time records, and punitive retaliation against employees who questioned HR's accounting. And suddenly, Mira Sandoval's name was back in the picture. Her 2022 audit, the one I found locked and buried, was released in full by the Justice Department as part of the evidence dump. Reading it was like watching someone else hold up a mirror to everything I discovered. It validated every suspicion, every sleepless night, every line of code I fed into SentraWatch. Myra's report outlined an intentional suppression of digital trace evidence, and directly implicated Trent Albury as the person who obstructed the audit's release and ordered its premature archive. It even mentioned a supplemental report she had been working on at the time of her resignation, one that conveniently disappeared when her badge was deactivated. The DOJ recovered fragments of it, enough to prove deliberate interference. Westvale's internal crisis team tried to spin it, but the public wasn't buying it. The stock nosedived by 37% in just 1 week. Major clients terminated contracts or paused pending internal review. Their biggest freight partner, SentraWatch Logistics, publicly announced a rebid of their entire transport contract, a move that practically screamed, "We're jumping ship." Every headline was a gut punch to the company I had once given 6 years of my life to. But I didn't feel vindictive. I felt relieved. Like justice was finally stepping out from behind the curtain. That same week, the DOJ's whistleblower office posted an update online, a statement about reward eligibility for individuals who submit timely and actionable information leading to civil recovery. I saw my work referenced in the footnotes of the release. They never named me, of course. They wouldn't. But I recognized the language, the formatting, even the timestamps that matched SentraWatch's output. A federal whistleblower reward was waiting, sizable enough to change my life. But I never claimed it. I'd gone into this not for the money, but because silence had become too heavy to carry. Some part of me knew that taking the payout would mean going public eventually, and I wasn't ready for that. Not emotionally, not professionally. Besides, what I'd earned back was more valuable than a check: my sense of integrity, my purpose, and the quiet knowledge that one voice, backed by evidence and resolve, could topple a giant. The collapse had begun. But I hadn't done it for revenge. I'd done it because someone had to. They thought that by blacklisting me, they were erasing me from the industry, like I'd vanish quietly, tail between my legs, maybe pivot to something safer, something smaller. But being shut out didn't end my career. It gave me purpose. It forced me to take everything I'd learned, every script I'd written, every audit trail I'd parsed, every lie I'd uncovered, and shape it into something powerful. What started as SentraWatch, a homemade failsafe built during nights and weekends, evolved into SentraEthix, a full-scale internal compliance engine designed to catch corporate fraud before it metastasizes. It wasn't revenge. It was prevention. I built the first version from my apartment, just me, a used ThinkPad, and enough coffee to make a barista worry. I redesigned the architecture to be modular, scalable, and built entirely on encrypted cloud infrastructure. I added dashboards for HR, triggers for legal teams, and predictive analytics for early warnings. But more than that, I made it bulletproof. Everything SentraEthix logs is tamper-resistant, time-stamped, and privately mirrored offsite. The moment someone tries to erase a record, the system doesn't just alert, it snapshots, escalates, and archives. I designed it with the kind of paranoia only the wrongly accused truly understand. And then I found someone who believed in it. Jensen Blair had been my mentor back when I first started at Westvale, before she left for a strategy firm out in Boston. She always told me, good work will outlive bad politics. When I reached out, I didn't expect much. But within a week, she flew out to see a demo. By the end of the month, we were sketching out a roadmap on her living room whiteboard with 2 mugs of chamomile tea and a pack of sticky notes. 3 months later, we had a pilot contract with a Fortune 500 that I still can't name publicly, but I will say this: they'd been burned before, badly, and they were hungry for prevention. Walking into that first boardroom as a consultant, not an employee, was surreal. I wasn't looking to climb anyone's ladder anymore. I brought the ladder with me. The room was full of suits and cautious eyes, but when I showed them how SentraEthix could detect overlapping entries, flag calendar time anomalies, and identify expense report fraud before the CFO even saw the numbers, I didn't need to beg for attention. They leaned in. They asked questions. They scheduled follow-ups. Not one person cared where I used to work. They cared about what I'd built. And no, I never touched the whistleblower reward. I let it sit. Not out of fear, but out of principle. I'd already taken what I needed from the experience, the clarity, the clean break, the inner peace of knowing I didn't fold. What I got instead was the knowledge that my little script, born out of survival and curiosity, had helped stop over $11.4 million in theft, fraud, and manipulation from staying hidden. Not bad for someone they tried to erase with a 30-minute HR meeting and a fake violation asterisk. These days, I sleep fine. Better than I ever did at Westvale. I'm not just working, I'm building a future on my own terms. Companies call me now, not the other way around. I decide who I work with, and I never again wonder if I'm disposable. Because I know now, truth isn't always loud, but it's lasting. SentraEthix is expanding. We've signed with 2 more clients, and I'm already mentoring a new team of engineers who, like me, came from places that didn't value them until they were gone. There's a certain poetry in that asterisk. So no, they didn't win. They lost something bigger than they ever realized, someone who could have protected them from themselves. I was never their threat, I was their warning they chose to ignore. Now, I'm the shield for companies that actually want to change. I walk into meetings with confidence, a clean conscience, and 0 regrets. And when people ask what I do, I just smile and say, I build systems that tell the truth.